In this video, we are going to talk about how to deal with input that comes from the user. We're going to look at getting input out of the console. We're also going to look at how you convert strings to other data types. So far, we've only seen converting other data types to strings. And we're also going to talk a bit about how you deal with users making mistakes, because believe you me, users make mistakes all the time. Your programs are going to have to deal with them. So let's take a look at a pretty simple little console application here. Now, as I said at the beginning of this course, we're mostly looking at console applications in this course. And the reason for that is because they are very simple. They're very straightforward to understand and to explain. You don't need a big concept count in order to understand how things work. If I were trying to explain how Windows Forms or web servers or Windows Presentation Foundation applications work, I would have to introduce a lot more machinery, whereas the console applications are very straightforward, and that's kind of why we start with them. They are very retro. Hardly any of you, if you are writing programs professionally or as amateurs, will ever write a console application where users are typing information into a console window. The point of doing this is, one, it's straightforward to explain, and two, no matter how the users get the information into the program, they're going to make mistakes, and you're going to have to deal with them in roughly the same ways. So this is valuable information, even though the sort of user interface is pretty terrible. So anyway, let's take a look at some code here. As you know, console write line writes a line out to the console. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that console read line reads a line in from the console. So let's just try this program out and see what happens. I'm going to step into it. All right, we write out, what's your name? Now we say, now the next thing that we're going to execute is read line. All right, so we'll go to our console window. I'll type in my name, Eric. All right, so this is the line that just executed. And you see over here that the string variable name is now equal to Eric. So this seems to have worked. And then I can write out hello, and then replace this braced 0 with whatever value is in here. And if we look at our console window, it says, hello, Eric. All right, that seemed to work. Console input is easy. All right, so now a problem is going to arise. The problem is I also want to ask what the user's age is. So let's try to do that same thing. We'll say console.writeLine, how old are you? Your name here. And then we'll say int age is equal to console.readLine. And we've got a red squiggly here. What's going on? All right, well, it says the class console represents the standard input-output error stream for console applications. OK, that doesn't tell us what's going wrong here. It just tells us what we already know about the console. The important bit is that last line there, cannot implicitly convert type string to int. It turns out that console.readLine, you can see from this tooltip here, reads the next line of characters from the standard input stream, and it returns a string. Right? And we do not know how to turn a string into an int. Right? So we have a bit of a problem here. Well, how are we going to solve that? Well, here's what I'm going to do. We have a method called int.parse, which is one of the built-in methods of the integer type. So instead of trying to read in an integer, we're going to read in a string. We'll put that in a variable called user input. Then we'll say my integer variable age is int.parse of the user input. And then I will tell you that that's pretty old. So let's try this out and see what happens here. So we'll once again step into the program. All right, we'll write out what's your name. We'll read in Eric. We will write out, hello, Eric. How old are you, Eric? Now we'll read another line here. And I'll type in, let's see, how old am I? I guess let's say it's 2015, so I guess I must be 42. All right. All right, so now we'll come back here. The user input is the string 42. Int.parse takes a string and it returns the integer that is in that string. Right? All right, and now age is the integer 42. Right? This guy is the string 42. You notice the subtle difference between those two. This one, the string 42, is in double quotes. This one, it's not, right? Indicating this one's a string, this one's not. All right, and then I can say, well, that's pretty old. Yeah, it sure is. All right, so apparently we're good, right? That's totally straightforward. There's no problem here. Well, I'll say my name is Eric, and how old are you, Eric? I am 42. All right, and oh dear. We've got this error message here. It says, format exception was unhandled. An unhandled exception of type system format exception occurred in mscorelib.dll. Additional information, input string was not in a correct format. So what's going on here? This is called an exception. Now we've seen before that when something goes wrong in a C# program, it puts a red squiggly underline under the thing and it does not allow you to run the program. That did not happen here. We were allowed to run this program. This failure happened while the program was running. The program has essentially crashed and died because we made a mistake. Now you might say it crashed and died because the user made a mistake. I should have typed in numbers instead of letters. But the user of the program is going to do crazy things. Users of all programs do crazy things, and you have to write your programs defensively to account for that fact. Right? So we're going to have to figure out how to avoid this exception. Now there's a bunch of different ways to handle exceptions. We're not going to talk about them very much in this course. We are going to talk later on about how to produce your own exceptions, but we're not going to talk about how to handle exceptions that occur. Basically, this exception is totally avoidable. You should only use int.parse for situations where you already know that the string that you are attempting to parse contains an integer. And those situations are very few and far between. Right? So how are we going to fix this? I'm going to stop this program here. Right? So here is a better way to do this. Right? We're going to read in we're going to have a variable int age. All right. So let's take a look at this version now. So same thing as before. We take in our user input as a string. Right? We have a variable called age. We're not going to give it a value yet. Then we have a variable that's a Boolean called success. Now we're going to call try-parse instead of parse. Right? And so the thing about try-parse is it essentially has to return two pieces of information. It has to return, was this thing actually an integer? And second, if it was an integer, what value did it have? Right? So we need both a Boolean and an integer out of this thing. But it can only return one value. Right? So there is a special syntax in C# for this that we have not yet seen before. This is called an out parameter. Some methods take these out parameters, and the argument that you pass in, the thing that you have to put inside the list of expressions, must be an expression which is a variable, and it has to be of the exact type that is expected by the method, right? And it must be preceded by the word out, which is a big red waving flag that says this variable is about to be mutated by this method, right? So this is how we get around the fact that methods can only return one value, right? It's going to return a Boolean. It's going to modify a variable of integer type that we give it. Right? Now, clearly, you can create methods that have out parameters. We're not going to discuss how to do that in this course. All right, so let's go back to the code and take a look at, once again, what this thing does. Right? So try-parse is going to take our user input string, and it's going to do two things. It's going to write either true or false into our Boolean here, and it's going to write a value, an integer value, into our variable age. Right? And you notice that we've never assigned age a value in here. Normally we would say, age equals 0 or something like that. And we would not be allowed to use the variable age until it had been assigned. C# knows that try_parse is going to assign a value into age, right? So this actually counts as an assignment, not as a use. All right, so let's debug into this, and we'll see what happens in a couple of different scenarios. So we'll just hit F10 to step into this thing. All right, what's your name? My name is Eric. How old are you? We'll read a line. All right, so if I type in 42, come back here. All right, now we're about to call try_parse. We're going to pass in the string 42. Age is 0. It has its default value right now. Success is false. It has its default value right now. Both of these things are going to be modified by the call to try_parse. Right? So we call that. Success is now true. It successfully determined that the string contained an integer. And age is now 42. So success is true. We're going to write, well, that's pretty old. And if we take a look at our output, there we go. All right. Now let's try that again. And this time, I will make a user error. So what's my name? Eric. How old are you? 42. I'm going to put a breakpoint right here. All right, we hit the breakpoint. So now we're going to call try_parse again. And this time, success is false. Age is 0. Right? So both of these things have been initialized. Success is not true, so we're going to go to the alternative of the if, and we're going to say, well, that's not an age. 42 is not an age. All right. Now, there are other things that I could do wrong here. Right? So for example, I could type in, what's your name? Well, I could not type anything. I could just hit enter. Right now it says, hello, blank. How old are you, blank? Oh, that's not what I want. So this is another user mistake here. So how am I going to deal with that? Well, let's try something here. What I would really like to do is I would like to keep on asking until I get something that is not blank, right? So I could do that like this. Actually, I'm just going to cut and paste this right up to here. So we want this at the beginning of our program. So this is one of those cases where you do want to use a do-while loop. You remember in the previous video I said, why would you want to always run a loop body once, even if the condition was going to be false? And this is exactly one of those cases, right? So I'm going to say do. I'm going to write out what's your name. I'm going to read in the line, right? And now I'm going to say, while the length of the name is 0, while I keep on typing in nothing, keep on running the loop. Keep on running the loop until that stops being true, until the length is not 0 anymore, right? But immediately you notice I have a red squiggly problem right here. The name does not exist in the current context. Well, why not? Well, remember the scoping rule, right? This is a block, right? This is a local variable. The local variable scope is its containing block, right? So if I want to use it outside of this block, and this while is outside of the block, and so is this console.writeLine, I'm going to have to declare this outside here, right? So let's say string name there. All right, delete that, and now everything should be just fine. All right. C# knows that by the time we get here, this guy will be definitely assigned because the loop body has run at least once. And so now if we run this program, if I type in my name, or if I just type enter, it keeps on asking me. We're in a loop. It's going to keep on doing this as long as that condition is true. And the condition is the length of my name is 0. Now the length is no longer 0, and we continue with the program. All right. So let's see if we can make this even more user-friendly. Right? So I'm gonna modify this program a little bit here. Right? So we're going to say, here's our local variable name. Right? We're going to have a while loop. It's while true, so we're going to loop forever. So you should expect that there's going to be a break in here somewhere. We're going to say, what's your name? Then we're going to read the line. Right? If the length of the name is 0, then I'm going to write out a message saying, well, that's not a name. And then I'm going to continue the loop. Right? Otherwise, I'm going to break out of the loop. Right? So let's try this and see what happens. First of all, let's just run it and see what happens. So if it says, what's your name? I type enter. That's not a name. That's not a name. That's not a name. Eric. That is a name. All right, and the program continues. So let's take a look at how that looks in the debugger. Right? So we'll step into it. What's your name? We'll read that. I'll hit enter. All right, so now we say, what's name? Well, it's the empty string. Its length is 0, so this condition is true. All right. We write out that's not a name. Then we continue. What does continue do? You know what continue does. It checks the condition again. The condition is true, so we enter the body of the loop. We say, what's your name? This time, I will write out Eric. All right, what's the length? The length is 4. So we take the alternative. The alternative breaks out of the loop, and we're done. Now, this is a little bit more complicated than it needed to be. Right? I don't need to have quite all of this structure here. Right? So let's take a look at maybe a more streamlined way of writing this. Right? So I'm just going to cut this out here, replace that in here. All right, so in this streamlined version of the loop, I'm going to say while true again. So I'm going to loop until some break happens. Write out what's your name, read it in. If the length is not 0, I'm going to break out of the loop. The loop is done. Otherwise, I'm going to write out that's not a name, and we're going to keep on going. Right? So let's step through this and see how that goes. All right, so we entered the loop. We write out what's your name. We read in an empty string. Check to see, is the length of this thing 0? It is. So the condition is not met. We write out that's not a name. We continue the loop. We check the condition. The condition is true. We write out what's your name. We check it again. This time through, the length is 4. What happens? We break out of the loop. Right? So you remember in a previous video, the question came up, why would you ever want to break out of the middle of a loop? And this is the reason why. Right? We might want to have to check a condition sort of halfway through a loop. Now, we could, as you saw, we did structure this loop in various different ways. We could put in some Boolean variables, and we could change the structure of the loop in a variety of different ways so that we didn't have to break out of the middle. But you very often see loops written this way because it's very convenient. And the kind of moral of the story here is try to keep the body of your loops very short and simple, right? Because if they get longer than a page, and they've got a bunch of breaks and continues in them, it gets very difficult to understand them. All right, so we just did that for the name. Let's do the same thing for the age. All right, so here we are going to loop forever. Right? We're going to write out how old are you. We'll take in the user input as a string. Then we will try to parse it, right, as a number. If that succeeds, we'll break out of the loop. Otherwise, we'll say that's not an age. We'll go back up to the top, right, and ask again. Right? When we eventually break out of the loop, we'll say that's pretty old. All right, so let's run this whole program and see how that works. All right. Just going to hit go. All right, what's your name? If I keep on hitting enter, it keeps on saying that's not a name. When I actually type in my name, it then breaks out of that loop. Now it starts saying how old are you, right? If I hit enter, it says, well, that's not an age. If I type in something that's not a number, it says that thing is not an age. How old are you? 42, right? And then we break out of the loop. Now, something you might have noticed there, let me just run that again real quick, right, is if I hit enter here, it says blank is not an age. That's maybe not a super good user experience either, right? You might want to have another test in here that says if the length of the string that was typed in for the age is equal to 0, then give a different error message. We're not going to look into that today. You get the idea. Maybe try that on your own, see if you can implement that feature. Summing up, always code defensively. Your users will not do what you think they're going to do, and they certainly won't do what you want them to do. Use int.parse to turn a string into an integer only in those very rare circumstances where you actually know that the string contains an integer. You want to use int.tryparse for all of those other situations. And similarly, there's a method double.tryparse and decimal.tryparse, and we'll take a look at some of those in later videos. And try to keep your loop bodies as short and simple as you possibly can to make them easier to understand. Try to fit them onto a single page.